Welcome back. If you happen to think we're living through right now is just typical Democrat versus Republican, think again. Yep, it wasn't that long ago when protesters burned effigies of Obama. The crazies even made up stuff like he was a Muslim born in Kenya. There were ugly protests against George W. Bush as well, some even calling him a Nazi. But by and large, this was fringe stuff. Now, if you're a supporter of the president or an opponent, it feels like a battle over our way of life, whatever that way of life is to you. There's not a whole lot of let's agree to disagree out there, and in some cases, it is getting downright dangerous. And joining us for more are Dan Maduri of News Talk Florida, Rita Ferrandino, the former chair of the Sarasota Democratic Party, and Nick Altier of the Sarasota Republican Party. And folks, I want to start this off again with showing what happened to our reporter Jess Dowdrick when the president was in Tampa just a few weeks ago. Inside, the rally had started, but this was what was happening outside as we went to Jess for her live report.
Alan, we're right in the middle of all of it right now. Breaking up the Trump supporters and the protesters. They've been standing between them because there are a lot of people, as you can see, getting rowdy, using profanity, fighting with one another. So the police officers are breaking all of this up. There have been many verbal fights today. I haven't seen anything physical, just a lot of yelling, a lot of screaming, and again, a lot of police presence to break everything up here outside.
Now, Dan, you were inside while this was happening, and you were near Jim Acosta of CNN, who himself, and this made national news, that he was verbally accosted, so to speak. It's not defensible what happened to him inside, but he is the White House reporter at the center of this whole story. Jess is a local reporter who doesn't regularly cover politics here, but those protesters out there did not draw any distinction between him and her doing their jobs.
Yeah, no, I don't think they're looking to draw any distinction. I think that the media is the target right now. I think that it's become just the cornerstone of Trump administration, just one of the easiest things to kind of punch over and over and over again. And when I was inside the press pit, they had us lined with, some makeshift volunteer security guards, so to speak, and you could feel there was a little tension between the press and between people. They'd walk by, they'd say a little this, say a little that. But when Jim Acosta walked in, I mean, it was just a total transformation of everything. You could feel the crowd turn immediately. I mean, it might as well have been, Lucifer walking into this place, into a place of God, basically, and they were freaking out, they were angry, they were raging, and to his credit, he actually did try to interact, engage, shake some hands that would be, offered to him and really prevent and tell forth his side. So to his credit, he did bring that forth.
Nick, let me ask you, when you see both sides at an event like that, you had the anti-Trump protesters there and the verbal exchanges between them and the Trump supporters there, to the degree it is, and you've been around politics long enough, whether it was Obama or George W. Bush, there's always protests, but not quite like that.
It's very unfortunate that we've gone in this direction. I don't think it's very helpful for the future generations, nor is it very helpful right now in our current standing. If we keep acting like this, we're going to end up with larger problems. Like right now, we're just yelling at cameras. But as you saw when that shooter went out at the baseball game where the congressmen were playing baseball, it can snowball into a larger item, and we don't want to see that. I think it's really important that leadership, both Republican and Democrat, maybe step up and provide some leadership to all these minds out there who...
Absolutely. My son was playing pickup basketball at the local YMCA. He's 19 years old, and they were all jeering about how much they hated Democrats. And they didn't even know he was a Democrat. It just is in the vernacular of our society, and they're vilifying the sides. And that's not helpful for dialogue. Where's dialogue? Where's the content?
Welcome back. We are talking about the political climate, and joining us for more are Dan Maduri of News Talk Florida, Rita Ferrandino, the former chair of the Sarasota Democratic Party, and Nick Altier of the Sarasota Republican Party. And I want to start this segment by using a quote from the National Review, which wrote, when it comes to the deterioration of the political conversation, then Americans largely agree on the diagnosis. They disagree on the cause. Republicans tend to put more blame on past and present Democratic leaders, the liberal media, radicalized campuses, and other left-wing institutions. Democrats finger Donald Trump, Republicans in Congress, gerrymandering, the religious right, and conservative media as the culprits. Rita, is it a shared blame out there, or is one side or one person more responsible than others?
The apple rots from the top. It's all about leadership. And I do believe that Donald Trump continues daily to stir this pot. It's been a cultural dynamic that's been getting worse and worse, and every day he just shovels more on.
Dan, I'm interested, because you really have your finger on the voice of a lot of people in the Tampa Bay area here. I mean, there was, partisanship when Obama was there, when George W. Bush was there, but are all things equal in terms of what Rita was saying in terms of presidential leadership and setting up whatever divisiveness is out there?
Well, I do think that the president sets the tone from like a cultural, spiritual standpoint. I think that they're all kind of cultural, spiritual leaders, some way, shape, or form. But I also think that, we've transformed ourselves as a society that we're no longer Americans first. What are we first? We're individuals first. We're chasing after social media followers first. I mean, you have to remember, in this country, there was a time in which young men throughout the country who could not go fight for our country in World War II because they couldn't pass a physical, they'd commit suicide. They would commit suicide because they were so embarrassed and it was so tragic to them and personally and to their family. Now, you flash forward now, and President Trump talks about, we're going to go to Mars, we're going to go to Mars, we're going to go to Mars. Would it be a tremendous feat and an incredible accomplishment for the nation at large? People saying, what does that mean to me? It means nothing to me. I got no money in my bank account. My kids are not going to the schools correctly. It means nothing to me. So we've transformed into a consumeristic, me-first type of culture, and that's why you see this division that you do.
Nick, how do you draw the distinction between, and a lot of Republicans I talk to say, look, I may not like how President Trump talks or tweets or whatever, but I like what he's doing. How do you set that aside from what a lot of Republicans, as they say is the damage caused by his tone and his rhetoric?
Well, first of all, you can't blame Trump for the actions of individuals. Individuals have control over their own actions. So to point blame would be like pointing blame on the Democratic Party for all the radical actions that Antifa has taken. Rioting after the presidential election, you didn't see Republicans rioting after the Obama election. So you can't, certainly blame the leadership. People have to take responsibility among themselves.
Okay, we're going to just get warmed up here. Our conversation on today's political climate will continue right after this quick break. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are talking about the political climate out there, and joining us for more are Dan Majuri of News Talk Florida, Rita Ferrandino, the former chair of the Sarasota Democratic Party, and Nick Altier of the Sarasota Republican Party. And Dan, let me start with you, because I'm thinking constantly about where this is all going. Given what's happening in Washington right now, I would imagine if we went to the direction that the Democrats took over the House and impeachment was a real option, you could imagine that Republicans are not, or Trump supporters are not going to sit and take an impeachment of this president. On the other hand, if President Trump somehow shut down the Mueller investigation, Democrats are not going to take that sitting down. So where does this go, given the fact, we often talk about what's happened like in the Balkans during the 1990s. I remember the former CIA director saying that we take for granted the thin veneer of our society. Just how dangerous could this be out there?
Well, I think it's, it can be incredibly dangerous, especially the way it goes. It also shows just the power of getting out and voting. I do, in fact, think that, all over the country right now, Florida's primaries aren't until the 28th, Tuesday. Extraordinary late primary. It's ridiculous it's that late. All over the country, they're already in general elections, and the points are just so razor thin. I mean, they're 1 point here, 1 point there. You actually are looking at either the Democrats picking up a large majority of the House and taking the House back, or the Republicans doubling down on their success in establishing themselves and gaining some seats in the House. So it really goes back to just the power of voting. If you vote and people go and vote, if the Democratic Party takes the House, Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi then will take articles of impeachment to the president. If the Republicans do in fact win, Bob Mueller will be terminated along with Rod Rosenstein by November 7th, 12:01 a.m. in the morning. It'll be over with. Trump will say, they've doubled down on me, they believe me, forget you.
Based on that, Rita, I don't see how voting and an election solves this problem here, because depending on who wins, the other side, given what is actually happening and the issues that we are talking about in Washington, that I can't imagine that either side will take this sitting down.
No, it's tumultuous times. I mean, when you talk about voting, you know, I'm really super concerned today. The DNC's was hacked by Russian hackers. We have no real systems in place to be preventing, you know, electioneer tampering. So even that, are we even going to be able to vote? So I do think we're in really tumultuous times.
Nick, same question to you in terms of, does voting solve all these problems here? I can't tell you how many times, you know, I read viewer comments saying, hey, Trump won, you know, elections matter. But if on either side, whether it's the Republican side or Democratic side, if you went in the direction of impeachment or you shut down the Mueller investigation, I find it hard to imagine that either side will just say, you know what, those are the rules and that's all there is.
Well, unfortunately, they don't do that, but they should. I mean, you should trust the system and how it works, and if there is so-called hacking taking place, then we should definitely address that as well and get in there and make sure that's not happening. I'm sure there's preventative measures that could be taken in order to prevent that from happening in the future.
That's a whole other
That's another show.
The president did say in an interview just this week, if Russia did it, which is not helpful when his own intelligence community says that in fact it had. But Dan, I think
the point is that this is also, I think, a result of what takes place when in the last 3 administrations, 18 years, the president by half the country has been viewed as illegitimate. George W. Bush was viewed as illegitimate because Jeb Bush hanging chads here in the state of Florida. Barack Obama, as you mentioned, Kenyan-born, illegitimate. Now Donald Trump, illegitimate because Russian hacking. So we've never really healed as a country. We've never come together a country and said this is our president, whether we like it or not, because they've always been illegitimate for almost 20 years.
Do we have to live with that, or at some point, do you expect, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat in the White House, that things will even out, or are we talking about a permanent state of affairs here?
Well, all I know is we've got a local primary going on right here, and people are voting in very large numbers. The Democrats, who have a much lower voter registration number to the Republicans, have outpaced the Republicans here locally in vote by mail and early voting up until today. So I think people are really fired up, and so I think that even when you've got a primary election in August 28th, that people in Michigan are voting by mail.
Well, we want people to be fired up on both sides of the aisle, but the question is when they meet each other in the hallway at work or outside on the baseball field, not beating each other up or, God forbid, anything more than that. And Nick, I mean, we are seeing this not just when the president comes to town, but in a lot of other situations here. And the question is, how do we get past that?
Well, at the end of the day, we all got to remember this is one country, and we are one people. United, we are strong. So long as we're divided, we're going to be weak, and we're going to allow things, let's say the Russian hacking, to take place. It's going to require both sides of leadership coming together and providing an example for the people, and doing that by not promoting any type of this violent acts, and not that they promote it,
but hold on a second, because I want to ask Nick this question. What responsibility does the president have towards creating that kind of atmosphere when he makes up names for people who disagree with him politically, when he calls them out, when he, every single day on Twitter, when he creates, as we saw in the last 2 weeks, an enemies list?
Sure. So I wouldn't handle things exactly the same way, but again, it boils back to, even if someone prompts you, sticks and stones will break my bones, words will never hurt me. You can't lower yourself to any sort of level and by reacting with a violent protest or tearing a small business man's one little business he has apart. A lot of people go out of work and jobs, not just the businessmen, but jobs are affected.
So I do want to say during the Tea Party movement, which was 2008, Joe Gruters was the chairman of the Republican Party. I was the chairman of the Democratic Party. We came together. We made a joint statement of civility. We stood together, and we tried very hard to keep our people in a civil manner. And so it can happen and it can work. We just have moved far from that.
Why doesn't it happen more often? I read a story in our news headlines today about Joe Gruters and Margaret Good, two state representatives, have a joint town hall meeting on the red tide situation. I read another story today that fewer members of Congress and other legislators are even holding town meetings anymore because they don't want to have situations where they get out of control.
Yeah, well, they're also all terrified of going viral for all the wrong reasons. The social media dynamic has really shaken that up. Not to mention gerrymandered districts. It doesn't benefit somebody who wants to be a career politician to sit there and hold a joint press conference with the opposition, because the opposition might cost them their seat one day when someone like a Cortez comes around and runs a hardcore left or a hardcore right. So we live in a world that we've constructed, and we've constructed it that we only cater to the fringes, and we get dominated by the fringes because everything we've done is to secure safe seats for the federal government and really for the state government too. So in order to save safe seats and secure safe seats, you gerrymander districts, then therefore you get hardcore partisan individuals who will not break on anything.
All right, we have to take a quick break, and we'll be back for final thoughts in a moment, so stay with us. And our guest joining us right now for final thoughts. And Nick, you just said something as we were coming out of the commercial break. I think there is a deeper issue going on here. I want to give you a moment to explain.
Well, I think people have removed themselves as far as having personal relationships, and we all hide, a lot of the youth and a lot of the young population hide behind profiles. You see more time of people sitting down looking at their phones at family dinners and whatever restaurant you go than laughing with their father. So you lose that. It's a real problem when you go on social media and you tear someone to shreds and act like you did nothing, because you wouldn't do the same thing sitting in front of somebody, looking them in the eye and ripping them.
Right, but really you use the example of your son getting harassed at a basketball game there. So in some cases, this is coming out of social media and having real world results.
Consequences, absolutely. He's been going to that Y since he's born. And all of a sudden, he's getting harassed by,
I thought you said they didn't know he was a Democrat. He just overheard them harassing
No, they
earlier.
were, the vernacular of what they were talking about was how much they hated Democrats, and they don't know he was a Democrat.
So they weren't really harassing him, they were just like talking about how.
Well, he felt it was harassment because they were, saying how horrible Democrats were.
Yeah.
So Dan,
which is just not called, it's uncalled for.
I have a lot of friends
on either side.
On either side, and yeah, it's unfortunate.
Dan, we could blame social media all we want, and maybe a lot of the blame does go there, that we are looking at pages that of organizations or groups that we agree with. But tell us what, in your opinion, what has to come out of our nation's leaders in terms of the examples that they set in terms of the proper way to debate and argue the issues. Because what we're not talking about, what we haven't talked about for the last hour, is disagreements on particular policies.
Yeah, and policies seem to have fallen by the wayside, but it is interesting that normally these things were left up to lieutenants and aides and people who had no idea that they were working in government. Now it seems like because we live in this direct-to-consumer world, Trump's just taking it direct-to-consumer constantly and continuously. I just think that when it comes to people and people being getting some ribbing or here or there, but what I think it comes down to is that we've lost all ability to be decent. We are just an indecent society. For whatever reason, manners are failing us left and right, and from something very simple as a dog biting you as you walk by and then being like, it's all right, whatever, and just walking off, to people ending up being assaulted on playgrounds and things of that nature.
Well, we're ending on a real happy note tonight, but it's important to talk about these things, so I want to thank you.
But we do have an election. If you've got to vote by mail ballot, you should return it. Go to early vote. That's where you're.
Do good.
Yeah, that's where you can make a difference.
Thank you to our guests for joining us tonight. Dan Majuri of News Talk Florida, Rita Ferrandino, the former chair of the Sarasota Democratic Party, and Nick Altier of the Sarasota Republican Party.